Good morning, everyone. This is the Insignificant Stoic, and today we're going to continue our look at Stoic logic. Today I want to cover how we can recognize logic and what it's for. So, you can't see logic, but you can recognize it. You know it when you've seen it. I'll give you the example of the clockmaker. If a man makes a clock, and the clock works, you can say, well, there's logic behind that, right? Because the thing works. If it doesn't work, you can say, well, there's no logic behind it, So logic in two ways. One, it's end result, and two, if that end result works, right? It has to work. In other words, it has to make sense, right? So for us to look at that a little bit more deeply, we're going to go into Plato's dialogues, and namely Euthydemus, where Socrates is having a discussion with Cleinias, I think, about good, bad, and different. In my translation, this is the first sentence in chapter 280. Socrates here is posing a question, but when he does that, just agree with him, it'll go easier for you. He's making a statement. He says, then wisdom always makes men fortunate. For by wisdom no man would ever err, and therefore he must act rightly and succeed, or his wisdom would be wisdom no longer. Okay, so there's three words I want to point out here. Wisdom, err, and succeed. First of all, succeed means the thing works. Right? So in this case, what the man is doing is working, right? So to say succeed in this sense implies logic, right? It implies logic. So if the man's successful, there's logic behind what he's doing, all right? What's err mean? Well, err means, you could say mistake, but it also means falsehood, right? So, because it's not true, okay? So, wisdom would prevent a man from doing something that's not true, okay? It didn't work, right? So, wisdom, since it prevents man from erring and helps him to succeed, to work, wisdom is associated with logic on the one hand and truthhood on the other. So, wisdom is not about knowledge. Knowledge isn't indifferent, but wisdom is truth and it is logic. So truth and wisdom are associated with logos, right? So the hallmark of logic is that it works, and you know it in its end. And logos means truth, means wisdom, means reason, reasonableness. That implies a thought process, right? So logos sort of implies to us a correct process of thinking, and we know it's correct because it works. What is argumentation? Well, if you read in Diogenes Laertius's summary of Stoic logic, Diogenes says, and quoting various Stoic authors, points out that these different subdivisions of logic are there to find the truth, right? So argumentation is a system whose, at the end of it, you find out if the point in the two opposing arguments, which one is true, right? That's how you know if the logic was successful, right? So this whole talk about perception, thinking, and ethics is there to find out if it's true, right? If it is true, if the logic is true in Stoicism, if it's physics is true, and if its ethics is true, then that would mean the whole animal, right? The whole animal of Stoic philosophy would have to work in the end, right? So, what we're actually doing here by saying that you know logic by its end, which is the thing works, and showing how the subsystem works and how it correlates to the three main divisions shows then how that the system should work, right? So all these bits here have to work if these other three main things are going to work for the whole philosophy to work, right? And you know it all works because of the end. So I'm just pointing out to us that there's a relationship in logic between something working, right? And that something working is basically the whole. So I'm trying to prove my point that in order for a philosophy to be complete, excuse me, all of its aspects and the subcategories underneath it, physics, logic, and ethics in this case, they all have to work. And the way you find out how they work is through argumentation. And argumentation is an appeal to logic. So, you have your arguments, and then it goes up to logic, right? So you have your arguments, dialectics, and all that stuff goes up to the category of logic, and that supports the whole. So in order for a philosophy to work, the whole thing has to work. All the bits and pieces and whatnot have to work in it. It's like the clock. All the springs and gears and wheels, they all have to work. If one of those things does not work, the whole thing falls apart. Okay? So Stoicism is a philosophical system. It was created by a guy and later influenced by a bunch of other people. It had a beginning. It didn't come out of a vacuum, right? It was a response to cynicism. It had several hundred years of philosophy beforehand, and then the philosophy interacted with the environment, what was around it, and with other philosophies. We see that primarily in the Epicureans, for example. It's kind of highlighted, but other philosophies that were around there at the time. And if it is a successful philosophy, all those parts should work at the end. That's a question that we're going to ask later on. It may work in its parts, but really, does Stoicism work as a whole? We'll get to that eventually. Have a good day.